Давайте начнем наш последнюю перекопу перед страстным циклом. И, вероятно, будет последний наш перекопа в этом нашем учебном году. Лариса, да? Вы, как наша стандарт, чтица, вам стихи 33-37.
Uh, Mikhail, I've I finally answered your request, and I've prepared a little
Окей,
presentation on how I
окей,
was wrong. So at
окей,
some point, um, I I even have a PowerPoint to share with you. So
окей.
let me know
Then,
if and when.
then I suggest that we start with Joel's lecture
My
about
repentance. Yeah.
yes, about different datings of the Gospel of Mark that Joel suggested during his career. Joel, the floor is
And
yours.
can I share my screen?
Yes, I need to stop my screen sharing. Yes,
Okay.
here you are.
So now I should share my screen. Share. Okay. Uh, uh, well, so I promised I'd talk about how I've changed my mind about the
Yes,
dating of Mark. So I went back and I looked at the article that I wrote in 1992. That's where I expressed a first opinion. The article was on the Leben of Mark, the setting of the gospel in time and space. And I just have a short paragraph near the end. But there, I discovered actually that I started out arguing for a date after 70, after the destruction of the temple. Uh, and my main reason, and it's just a short paragraph that I have, but I argued that the uh, the prophecy that Jesus gives at the beginning of chapter 13 of the destruction of the temple corresponds so exactly to what happened that it probably reflects a perspective after the event. So that was my initial argument for, not, you know, the Jesus says here that there won't be any stone left on a stone. Uh, and I think I recognized that probably Jesus did say something threatening to the temple because we have this saying of his that's quoted in all the gospels and that the gospel writers seem to have trouble with, and they all deal with it in different ways. Mark calls it a false witness, whereas John seems to take it as a true witness, but then he says he wasn't speaking about the literal temple, but about the temple of his body. So, the church didn't seem to know exactly what to do with this memory that Jesus had threatened the temple. And that made me think that the church didn't make up the threat against the temple. So Jesus did say something threatening to the temple. Uh, and, that seemed plausible because we know from Josephus of other people who threatened the temple before it was destroyed. I mean, going back to the Old Testament, we have, Jeremiah's speech against the first temple. And then we had this figure described by Josephus, uh, whose name coincidentally was also Jesus, who Josephus tells us that this guy appeared about 4 years uh, before the war started, and he was going around the temple saying it would be destroyed. So, so again, so it's plausible, I said, that Jesus may have threatened, that the temple would be destroyed. But I still thought that um, the description in verses 1 to 2 of chapter 13 was so exact that it probably reflected somebody who has seen the temple destroyed. So that was my argument in 1992. But then by the time I published the first volume of my commentary in 1999, I had thought about it some more, and I wasn't so sure. And this was partly because I thought some more about this prophecy in chapter 13, verses 1 to 2. And I started thinking, well, does it really correspond so exactly to what happened? And the problem is that that didn't exactly happen. It wasn't exactly true that every stone that belonged to the temple was thrown down, because there's still some stones that exist even today that go back to the Herodian time. These massive stones at the base of the temple, that were at the base of the temple, that are now beneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now you can get around this, and I think Tyson does this, by saying, well, that wasn't really part of the temple itself, it was just its retaining wall. But still, it began to strike me as maybe an unfulfilled prophecy, that, every stone has not been thrown down from the temple. And I also, I didn't put this in the commentary that I see, but reflecting on it now, and I've mentioned this in previous weeks, Mark has the prophecy of the abomination of desolation, but that remains vague in Mark. He doesn't say that it's the destruction of the temple. And I've argued that maybe for Mark it means the occupation of the temple by the zealots. But it's a vague prophecy. Whereas if you look at what Luke, who is later than Mark, he changes that from when you see the abomination of desolation standing where it should not, then something bad's going to happen. Luke changes that to, but when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you should know that Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. So, that does seem to reflect a post-70 perspective, but I'm not so sure that Mark 13:14 reflects a post-70 perspective. And Matthew also, who is also later than Mark, not in this place, but in his version of the parable of the marriage feast, he has a quite specific reference, or a more specific reference, to the destruction of the Jerusalem, about the king, who is God, sending his armies to destroy the murderers and burning their city. And if you look at Luke's parallel to this, it's more vague, but Matthew has made it a more precise reflection of the situation that resulted in 70. So I guess, this confluence of circumstances made me think it was more likely than I had previously thought that the gospel might come from before 70, but I'm still not sure. and even what I mentioned about the lack of exact consonance between Jesus' description of the the throwing down of each stone with what actually happened. You could answer that partly by referring to Josephus also. Josephus, who had definitely knew about the destruction of the temple and is writing afterwards, Josephus also says that Titus leveled the city, and not only the city, but also the temple. He ordered it razed to the ground. So that doesn't quite correspond to what happened, but Josephus is later. So, it's possible that Mark, who also could be later, is using imprecise language, even though, he knows that the temple has been destroyed. So I guess my conclusion is that I moved from a situation where I thought I was more sure than not that Mark was talking from a post 70 perspective to one where I'm really not sure, but seems just as likely, maybe even a little more likely, that he's writing from perspective before 70, but this is not the ditch that I want to die in. So that's my thoughts on the subject as of now. I don't know. What do you think?
Thank you, Joel. If possible, I would like to have your presentation also.
You mean the PowerPoint?
Yes, this
Oh,
PowerPoint
sure.
presentation.
Okay.
If you can share it with us, it would be grateful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. I can share my notes, but I don't think you could read them. So. Okay. Yeah, I'll share the PowerPoint presentation. Yeah.
Okay.
But should I stop sharing it now?
You can, for example, send it to us
Yeah.
by email.
No, but I mean, should I stop sharing my screen now so that you can share your screen?
Okay.
Unless somebody has a question about the presentation. I just put it together in the last hour or so. Okay, I'll stop sharing my screen. Oh, Maria.
May I have a very stupid question?
Yeah.
About this passage, which is now on our screens. Are we sure that Jesus is talking about the temple here?
Uh-huh.
How? Why are you so sure that he's talking about the temple?
Well, I guess because he's coming out of, the very beginning says he's coming out of the temple. So I would think that the reader would think that then, when the disciples, say, "Oh, look at these magnificent stones and magnificent buildings," that he's referring to the temple.
Okay.
I guess, that would be the answer. This verse it's also interesting because, it does give the impression that at least the disciples seems all new to them. I mean, they're like people from the country, who come to Moscow or New York City and say, "Oh, look at these huge buildings." So at least it would seem to be an argument for the synoptics over against John, who has Jesus and the disciples having been, previously in Jerusalem. But I don't know. I mean, what do you think? What else could it be a reference to? I mean, I'd be willing to consider other possibilities.
Mm. Yeah, my guess was just about if we think that the reference of this tas megalas okudamas is the referent of this tas megalas okudamas is more vague. It
Okay,
could
yeah.
be another argument in favor of earlier dating.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah. I mean, I do think the temple was the most impressive edifice, the most impressive building in Jerusalem. So I think it's more likely that it's the temple, but yeah, I guess you would have to explain the plural, the oikodomai. I mean, yeah, anyway you look at it, it is kind of vague language. Now, is it vague language because that's everybody knows what you're talking about? I mean, it sort of reminds me of, I think in some rabbinic texts, the well, yeah, I mean, the Temple Mount is Har Habayit, you know, it's the mountain of the house. You know, it doesn't specify the house of God, but everybody knows that that's the house that you're talking about. But I do think you make a good point about the plural. Why is that? I guess I would think that it's maybe a plural of magnificence or something like that, but yeah, I'd need to think about that some more. Thank you for that question.
But the temple complex built by Herodotus was consisted of several different buildings, several different courtyards. So the plural is quite natural,
Yeah.
even if this complex was meant.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The temple complex was complex,
Exactly.
to state it aphoristically. Yeah.
Yeah, and in Matthew, it is oikodomai to Hieru, so it's
Yeah, right. He
you
specifies it.
makes it clear that.
Well, yeah, but of course you always wonder, you know, when Matthew changes something that is in Mark,
Yeah.
is he doing that to make clear what he thinks Mark already said, or sometimes, you know, he seems to be correcting Mark. So I think that would still be a question. You know, the fact that Matthew interprets it a certain way doesn't necessarily mean that he's interpreting Mark rightly. But I do think that's significant. Anyway, I don't know. I mean, um, yeah, I think the truth is I don't know. But you know, I guess you have to weigh the probabilities, and it seemed to me slightly more likely in 2000 or in 1999 or whenever I published my first volume that it was pre-70 than it had seemed you know, 10 years or so before.
Let me also ask a question. These verses 1 and 2 sound a bit strange, because it would be more logical if the disciples put a question like this when they entered the temple or were coming towards the temple. And when they're coming out of the temple, to say, look, such stones, it's strange.
Yeah, I've never thought of that, but I think that's a good point. Uh, I, hmm. I mean, I guess, yeah, he, he didn't want to, so the previous account, uh, uh, well, yeah, no, I don't know what to say about that. I think that's a good point. I guess he didn't want to stop, his previous story about them going into the temple in order to have this conversation. I mean, he went in, uh, he's been described as going into the temple the last time before this, I think when he cleansed the temple in chapter 11. And I mean, actually, yeah, in chapter 11, verses 15 and following, that would be a great point to put this prophecy, I would think, because it would help to explain why he does this violent action in the temple. But instead, he uses it here as the introduction to this whole series of eschatological prophecies. But I don't know. It would he does say his thing against the temple in John at the point where he is cleansing the temple. So I think your question is a good one, and I've never thought about it before. So that's another thing I need to think about. So that I can revise my commentary at some point and it'll be perfect. But thank you for that.
Joel, one more question. You mentioned last time the Jesus from Josephus who predicted the fate of the temple for 4 years
Yeah.
before the actual start of the war.
Yeah,
Have
and Josephus has this great description of, I just quoted part of it, but he keeps doing this and they keep telling him to shut up and he refuses to shut up. But they finally figure, and I think it even describes him being beaten by the Jewish authorities, to stop him, but he won't stop. But so they decide he's crazy, they let him go, and so he keeps doing this for 4 more years until the Roman bombardment comes, and the first stone that comes from the catapult over the walls of the city kills him. And as he's standing there and he's saying, a voice from the east, a voice from the west, a voice against this and that. And then he says, and a voice against me too. And then the stone lands on him. So.
Yes. Have there been any attempts to connect these Jesus with the image of Jesus in the early Christian tradition, so that probably as a kind of compilation of different Jesuses, this image that we know from Josephus might have contributed to the early Christian traditions?
Not that I know of. What I do know is that this Josephus, son of Ananias passage from this Jesus, son of Ananias passage from Josephus, it's very important for Ed Sanders in his Jesus and Judaism book. But he just uses it to say that, Jesus of Nazareth fits into a known sort of Jewish prophetic pattern, which could include hostility to the temple, at least the temple as it's presently constituted. I don't know anybody who has argued that the image of Jesus, son of Ananias, has somehow influenced the development of the tradition about Jesus of Nazareth. I mean, it would be an interesting project for somebody to take on. I guess I'm not aware of any early Christian commentators who seem to directly know about this other Jesus. But it is an interesting coincidence, and it's somewhat like the coincidence in Matthew, the guy who is called Barabbas in Mark. In some of the texts of Matthew, and this may be the original text, he's known as Jesus Barabbas, so Barabbas is just like he's Jesus, son of Abba. But that's another similarity between these two Jesuses, that maybe in that case there is some sort of parallel or contrast being made. Yeah, maybe it's a good project for one of your students. I'm not sure you can get a whole dissertation out of it, but maybe an article.
Yes, but unfortunately, I do not think we can have significantly much more than just a juxtaposition of these two passages. The name itself seems to be quite well spread among the Jews of that time, but still the correspondence and the coincidence asks for a question.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there are some striking parallels. This guy's action of threatening the temple is perceived to be a danger, so much so that the authorities arrest him, they beat him, but then they do let him go. So something different happens in the case of Jesus of Nazareth than happened in this otherwise parallel case of Jesus, son of Ananias. So that's also kind of interesting. And, I think maybe that says that Jesus of Nazareth was some sort of more fundamental threat to the powers that be than Jesus, son of Ananias, was.
Okay.
Okay,
May I
I'll
have
stop sharing. Yeah, sorry.
another question? It might be very naive of me, but I see another parallel because I listened yesterday to a lecture of Michael's lecture about the story of Lot and Sodom. And it just strikes me, it's about Mark 13:14, this flight of Judeans to the hills. It's like just striking that the angel instructed Lot and his family to fly to the hills. And one might just follow other parallels to these two stories. Could you just comment on that?
No, I think that is an interesting parallel. I'm not sure. I think that is something, that has been observed. And I may have noted it in my commentary. I guess, the other, well, certainly, the fate of Sodom and Gomorrah, it was, a known apocalyptic, was taken up in other apocalyptic literature. And, as would be logical, because it is, a biblical example of a very concrete judgment on the wicked city. And Jesus does say is it in a Q saying or just in Matthew, remember Lot's wife? So it's plausible that that was in the minds of Jesus and or early Christians. And as you say, the particular detail about fleeing to the hills might have reminded a reader of that story. So I think that's a good observation. I mean, now look, these Old Testament stories of destruction like that, and especially Noah's flood, then do recur both in the early Christian tradition, but also in other Jewish apocalyptic literature as an image of the judgment that's going to happen in the end time. So that would fit into a pattern of, the end time reflects the beginning time. So gospel reflects Genesis. Often true. I think that's a very good observation also.
Yes, I think that the parallel is even more conspicuous since already in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, we have the name Sodom applied to Jerusalem. For example, in Ezekiel.
Yeah.
This,
Yeah, that's a very radical anti-Jerusalem statement within the Hebrew Bible. Yeah.
Yes,
I mean,
and
it's shocking, really. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you.
if we look at Ezekiel 16:46, I can put.
Yeah. Okay. Let me stop sharing my screen.
Okay. Put on the screen. We have a very clear statement that Achotech Agdolah, your elder sister Shomron, and she lived in the north. Achotech Raktana Mimech Reshevet Iminech, and your younger sister who lived to the south of you, that's Sodom. And the fate of Judea is compared with Shomron and Sodom. So Jerusalem is almost like a new Sodom.
Yeah. Yeah, there's other yeah, I mean that's also like there's the Q saying in which Jesus threatens these Galilean towns, Capernaum, and he says, doesn't he mention he mentions Nineveh there? Does he also mention Sodom and Gomorrah? And
Yes,
he
exactly.
says, yeah. So, I mean that's a radical kind of leveling of the playing field, somewhat similar to what Amos does, right? For 3 transgressions of Sodom and for 4, but then applying the same sort of language to Jerusalem. It's a similar sort of denying of special covenantal status, I think, that you have already in some of the prophets and also in the Jesus tradition. I guess it does seem to me that, this term covenantal nomism, which Ed Sanders invented, I think sometimes that does seem to apply to Jesus and the Christian tradition, but sometimes they seem to challenge it. And but they challenge it in a way that is similar to the way some of the prophets also challenge it already. So but that's kind of a, you know, a theological, I think a lot of people, especially in America, think that all early Christians bought into Jewish covenantal nomism, and I'm not sure that I agree with that. But that's part of a larger issue than just the end of the world, which is what we're dealing with today.
Yes. Thank you, Joel.
Well, thank you. Now I finally have done that, so I can sleep easy tonight. It's been bothering my conscience for months.
Okay, we are happy with this. If there are no more questions regard to the general problem of Sitzen Leben of Mark, we can return to the pericope that we wanted to discuss today. The last pericope from the Jesus eschatological discourse.
I see that I do in my commentary mention the reference to the Genesis passage.
Mhm.
I just want to see what I say about it. Okay, yeah. Well, all I say is the exhortations in verses 15 and 16 recall the story about Lot. Oh yeah, also says Jesus says don't, I think maybe Vladimir already mentioned this. Jesus' instruction not to turn around
Mhm.
recalls the way in which Lot's wife ignored that warning. So it's not just fleeing to the hills, but also don't turn around. So does seem to be an echo there.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Ну что же, тогда почитаем притчу о хозяине дома. Лариса, вам слово.
33-го, да?
Да, с 33 и до конца.
Мгм. Блепете агрюпнейте, ук ойдете гар, поте гокайрос истин, ос антропос аподемос, афейстен ойкиан ауту, кайдус тоis дулюis ауту, тес exousian, гекасто то эргон ауту. Кайто тюроро, ενετέιλατο γίνα Γρηγορέ. Γρηγορέιτε ουν ουκ όιδατε γάρ, πότε ο Κύριος τες οικίας έρχεται. Οψέ μεσονιούκτιον, αλεκτοροφωνίας, πρωί με ελτών εξάφνευς γεροχημάς κατέλδοντας. Уходе юмин лего, пасен лего, Григорейте.
Спасибо. Смотрите, не спите. Ведь вы не знаете, когда настанет срок. Это как если бы человек, уезжая, оставил свой дом, на слуг, чтобы каждый из них делал свое дело. А привратнику велел быть всегда наготове. Бодрствуйте, ведь вы не знаете, когда придет хозяин дома. На закате или в полночь, с первыми петухами или с рассветом. А не то он придет неожиданно и застанет вас спящими. Что я вам говорю, то я и всем говорю. Бодрствуйте. Но вот здесь, конечно же, в греческом тексте мы видим ключевое выражение агрюпнейте. И григорейте. В своем русском переводе, который я сейчас на него смотрю, хотел бы подправить, в частности, как мы это видели уже не раз, с точки зрения того, чтобы привести в какое-то большее соответствие друг с другом те случаи, где у нас какие-то ключевые слова или какие-то образы пронизывают библейский текст. Я, пожалуй, хотел, по крайней мере, Грегорео здесь переводить единообразно. Привратнику велел всегда бодрствовать. Или наоборот, привратник велел быть всегда наготове, и ученикам он тоже говорит, будьте всегда наготове. Грегорео, конечно же, у нас соотносится здесь с агрюпнео в 33 стихе, то есть бодрствовать, не спать. Что посоветуете, сестры и братья? Единственное, что мне кажется, что вот эти три места все-таки, поскольку они содержат одно и то же ключевое выражение в греческом, должны быть переведены как-то одинаково. В какую сторону их подравнивать?
Мне кажется, бодрствуйте хорошо,
Но
потому что
привратник повелел всегда бодрствовать.
м, ну, если есть желание действительно все три места делать одинаковыми, получается так. Ну, потому что бодрствуйте несет в себе одновременно и прямой смысл, и метафорический. И это, по-моему, уместно. Кроме того, это термин аскетической традиции. Поэтому я вот думаю бодрствовать.
What does
Окей.
the verb mean? Bodstrovats? How would you?
Not to be asleep.
Oh, okay.
In the direct and in metaphorical sense.
I just had a linguistic question. I mean, in languages, aren't like consonant clusters supposed to disappear after a while? I mean, this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 consonants in a row. That seems excessive to me. Just a comment about Russian language.
It's
Yeah.
not characteristic of Russian language, but it happens from time to time. For example, in this particular verb.
It's kind of amazing, yeah.
I think there are probably less than a dozen words in Russian with 5 consonants.
And do you find it difficult to pronounce? Or-
No.
Well,
Uh-huh.
it's pronounced, in fact, with some sort of schwa, somewhere there in between. Бодрствуйте. Бодрствуйте. So,
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
I would rather
Yeah.
say that it's some sort of a liquid which almost makes a syllable,
Okay.
like in some languages where we have or functioning, in fact, like vowels.
I don't
Yeah.
think it's the case here, Mish. I think it's with this intermediary schwa, not boдрствуйте, not with the syllabic R.
Будь бодр. Будь
Yeah,
бодр.
but not in this verb.
Okay, probably.
It just seems to violate the morphological rules, you know, that.
No.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, that's a side comment, not the main. It's interesting that, you know, in the earlier part of the discourse, blepete kept appearing. And here in verse 33, we have blepete, but then it's combined with aggrupnete. And then that idea seems to take over with the 3 instances of gregorete. I mean, they're all kind of calling for attention. They're all verbs of perception, but towards the end of the discourse here, the particular verbs used switch. And I think it would be important to retain the idea of waking up or staying awake.
Yes, and of course, we have here parallel in Mark 14, the chapter that we'll read
Yeah.
next year, but even the same form, περίληπος εστίν ψυχέμου, έως θανάτου, μένετε kai Gregorate. And this is followed by a small teaching on the necessity to be watchful.
Well, yeah, and I do think that's important, that he's using language which has been established in the previous chapter as eschatological language. He's then transferring it to what's happening in Gethsemane. So this and other things, I think, convey the idea that what Jesus is going through is an eschatological testing. You know, like what he warns about in chapter 13, tribulation of the last times.
Interestingly, Matthew keeps Gregorate in passages that she borrowed from Mark, but Luke, in fact, downplays this topic. Gregorate was used just once in the whole Gospel of Luke.
Yeah, I think maybe you could say that Luke is less attuned to this kind of eschatological apocalyptic language than Matthew and Mark. It's just not as central to him.
Я бы сказала, что мне наоборот нравится, что у вас 2 способами переводилось это слово, но так хорошо, эти 2 перевода, они разные оттенки смысла. этого глагола передают. Поэтому, мне кажется, уравниваем их мы тоже что-то теряем немножко.
Ну да.
Ну да, но если в оригинале это одно и то же слово, то
Но дело не в том, что в оригинале одно и то же слово, а дело в том, что в оригинале, по-видимому, все-таки сознательно одно и то же слово.
окей.
Но интересно действительно, что Лука, пересказывая, скажем, ту же самую историю о Гефсиманском молении, из нее убирает глагол Грегорео. Это явно что-то говорит об изменившемся типе эсхатологических чаяний. Что еще можем мы сказать по этому поводу? По этому поводу или в целом по поводу эсхатологического дискурса? Или в целом по поводу всей той части Евангелия от Марка, которую мы сейчас заканчиваем, поскольку, как известно, Евангелие от Марка – это история страстей с длинным предисловием. Вот мы кончили предисловие. I just asked if anyone has any additional comments with regard to this pericope, or with regard to the eschatological discourse as such, or with regard to the whole part of the Gospel of Mark that you have just finished. Because if the Gospel of Mark is just the passion narrative with an extended preface, then we have just finished the preface through which we have been going through 3 years.
Well, I have a question. So I noticed in my translation for verse 33, I translated agrupnete as don't fall asleep. Now your
Yeah.
translation nespiche, does that mean don't fall asleep or just don't sleep? I don't know if there's a difference, but I guess my translation implies that you're now awake and you shouldn't go to sleep.
Literally, не спите is exactly do not sleep, but in
Yeah.
Russian, this I do not know whether the expression do not sleep in English can refer only to a command not to sleep under any circumstances, or can also refer to this particular moment of time when this command is uttered. But in
Yeah,
Russian,
I think
in
it's the
Russian,
latter. Yeah.
sorry,
I think it's the latter, that, yeah, wait. I mean, if you want to say at this moment, don't fall asleep right now, you would say don't fall asleep. You wouldn't say don't sleep, I think. And I'm trying to think of the circumstances in which you would say don't sleep in general. I'm not
Okay.
sure. Yeah, but
But at least in Russian, this is a quite normal way of saying, do not fall asleep now.
yeah, okay. Yeah, okay, that was my question. Yeah. I guess the other thing I think I already pointed this out, but just in terms of these repeated exhortations, which I think are quite striking about don't fall asleep or stay awake, I think they have a double meaning in the context of this chapter and the whole gospel. I mean, most literally, you need to keep awake to see the signs of the times, to see when the end is going to come and Jesus is going to return and all that. But it's also significant that these repeated exhortations to wakefulness immediately precede the beginning of the passion narrative. So again, I think it's a binding together of eschatological exhortation with linking that with the story of Jesus' death and resurrection. Those also are eschatological events, and maybe the decisive eschatological events. So I think these exhortations both look backward to the previous passages in chapter 13, but also forward to the passion narrative. And as we noted a few minutes ago, the language about keeping awake then recurs specifically in the Gethsemane scene.
Okay. Then
This
okay.
one other thing, this little in the previous verse, if you could scroll your screen down a little bit. This in verse 34, there's this little mini parable about a man who goes away and gives his servants or slaves each their own task. In the other gospels, that is it becomes a real parable, whereas here it's quite unspecific. And this is one of those cases where it seems to me that maybe Mark knows about this longer parable, but he's just giving you a very vague précis of it.
Does it belong to Q?
I think it's in Q. Yeah, it's certainly in Luke. Hold on a second. I have a note about it. Luke, okay, no, maybe it's only in Luke. Luke chapter 12, verses 35 to 38.
Luke chapter
12,
12.
Verses 35 to 38.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, it doesn't seem to me, yeah, it's not in Matthew. It doesn't seem to me, it seems to me more likely that Mark is giving you some sort of compressed summary of this than that Luke has just expanded it on the basis of this cryptic short allusion in Mark.
Yes, especially take into account that it is put in a completely different place in Luke's narrative than the parable that we have just seen in Mark.
Yeah, but it's interesting that this parable in Luke, it's also about being awake during the night, having your lamps lit.
Mhm.
And I think it's in an eschatological context in Luke.
But this has also quite a lot of topics in common with the parable of the wise and unwise maiden.
Wise and foolish virgins, yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
That's Matthew. Wait a second.
Yeah, Matthew 25 also, yeah.
There's no verb Grigorate used, but the image is still here. Pronizantos de tu nymphio, enustexan pasai, okay, a cateudon.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole point of the parable is you shouldn't fall asleep like these people do.
Exactly. Well, this parable is usually connected with the topic of the delay of the parousia. I mean,
Well,
Matthew
yeah, in
25.
the first verse it says something about the bridegroom was delayed,
Exactly.
so but I mean that may be what Matthew's using it for. But I think the basic point is you should be ready at any moment. And yeah, and of course, the use of the bride and the bridegroom metaphor for an eschatological event we do have in Mark in chapter 2. The bridegroom going away. How can they
Yes, exactly.
how can they mourn when the bridegroom is with them? Oh, numphios.
So there's a whole network of associations which is not limited to any particular gospel, but
Yeah, I'd say it's a treasury, of like eschatological images which come from the tradition, probably the pre-Christian apocalyptic traditions as well. But I do think it's interesting, that Mark's I'm trying to think of another case where he seems to know something that does appear in the other gospels, more in fuller form, but he gives you just, some sort of shorter version that's more cryptic.
Okay, it seems that we have finished the eschatological discourse, and with the eschatological discourse we have finished also the whole prologue to the Passion narrative. I do not know whether we should start the Passion narrative now, because next Thursday we have our master's and bachelor's thesis and works being defended at the university, and then we already have our holidays. So probably
Seems to me that this is a logical place to stop for the academic year.
yes, that's what I'm suggesting.
And
Finally,
God willing, if we're all still here in September, if the end has not come yet,
yes,
we can
we
meet
have
again.
already seen quite a lot of signs of the end mentioned in chapter 13. So probably
Wars and rumors of war.
exactly.
Yeah. But I don't know what the abomination of desolation is, but maybe we'll find out.
Okay. Then probably we can just congratulate each other with the fact that we have come to the threshold of the most important part of Mark, and let's go through it next academic year.
Good.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank
everyone.
you.
Th-
I think we should be able to finish the gospel in 3 more years or so.
Maybe.
If the Lord tarries.
I still think there is a good chance that we finish reading it before the eschaton comes, at least.
Hope so, yeah.
All the best.
Thank you, Joel, and thank you, everyone who were with
Thank
us.
you, everyone. Yeah. Okay, see you in September.
See you in September.
Thank you.
All right.
Спасибо большое всем.
Thank
See you.
you.
Okay.
Это очень
До
увлекательно.
свидания.
До
Спасибо.
свидания.
Bye.
Спасибо.
До свидания.
Маша, давайте мы с вами часов в 9 свяжемся. Нормально будет?
Спасибо.